Hello, my name's Tom Wilson, and today we're going to go through the Hyper Query workshop. These workshops are basically introductions to the Hyper service, and in this one, we're going to talk about two advanced features, query and bulk, both on the Hyper data service. This is part three of a three-part series. Part one, we introduced the data service. Part two, we talked about hyperconnect. And part three, we're going to talk about the query function and the bulk function of the hyper data service. In order to get the most out of this workshop, you'll need to know HTTP JSON APIs, JavaScript, and Git. And you will also need a GitHub account. So to set up our project, what we'll want to do is launch in Git Pod, and you can click this link right here, or and I'm in the Hyper63 Workshops NodeJS repo, and I'm looking at the data or the Hyper query or data query folder, the Hyper query workshop. And so to get set up, you want to launch this in Git Pod. That'll set up in a virtual machine for your development environment. Or you can, clone this repo and run it locally. You'll need to have, version 16 of Node.js installed at least or greater. And we'll want to launch in Git Pod. Now, the way that you launch in Git Pod is that you can either click this link and it should launch you, or you can install the extension and you get a button like this in GitHub. And then the last way is to just manually type the URL. So you can open up a new tab and just type gitpod.io and then pound and um, GitHub Hyper63 workshop slash Node.js. And when you type that, it will take you through kind of an onboarding, and you will be in a Visual Studio Code in your browser, which is your virtual machine, like this. So once you get that running, it just takes a few minutes to spin up. Then we want to head over to dashboard.hyper.io, log in there with GitHub, and click on the application we've been using in these workshops, and then go into that dashboard of the application in the keys section and click on the copy link here for the connection string. So we want to take this connection string and we want to go back to our Git pod and open up the folder data query and create a new file there, .env. And that .env file, we're going to put our environment variable hyper and set it equal and paste that connection string in. So that single connection string gives us everything we need to securely connect to the hyper service. So now that we have our environment variable set up, we're ready to get started with our workshop. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and run npm install or yarn, but we'll cd into the data.query folder, and I'll use yarn to install all the dependencies. And then I want to just install the latest version of hyperconnect, so I'll do yarn add hyperconnect. And now that we have hyperconnect installed at 0.1.8, which is great, then we're going to run a setup script. And this is just yarn setup or npm run setup. And this script will actually just update our database and make sure that we've got some data, some characters, some games, and some appearances. So that's really great. All of those ran well. And now we're going to just run yarn start to start our API server. And it's running on port 3000. And the server's got from the previous exercises kind of the create, update, get, delete, or remove, and list. So we can kind of test that out and see some data by just doing curl localhost 3000 API characters, and that should list our characters, which it does. Cool. And we could do curl games, and I'm just gonna use npmx to pipe in JSON to that to print that out a little nicer so you can kind of see our games that we got here. Donkey Kong, Super Mario, Yoshi's Island, Smash Brothers, Super Mario Maker. Pretty cool. Okay, so we got some good data. Now what we want to do is set up a query where we return um, all the characters that appeared in a given game. So if we do curl host localhost 3000 API characters query, and then we give it an attribute game ID equals game one, then that we want that to list all the characters that appeared in game one. If we said game two, then we would want it to list all the characters that appeared in game two. To do that, we go to our API folder, go to the characters folder, and the query um, file underscore query.js. This file um, has a handler for post that matches this post request. And right now it'll return not implemented. So if we run this result, we're going to get not implemented. So what we want to do is implement the hyper data query command in this web API handler. So to do that, before we were kind of importing hyperconnect and we could do that here, but what we did, since that's a repetitive process, we went ahead and kind of took care of that at the server so that we can attach it via middleware to our request object. So we can just kind of pull hyper out here. And we also need the query params because we're passing a query parameter of game ID. So we can just pull those out of the request object and get rid of this status 500, and we will do const result equals await hyper.data.query, and we're going to send in a selector. So we want to say type equals type appearance. So appearance is the document that kind of contains the game and the character relationship. So we want that, and we want to test it on the game ID. So we'll say game.id, and then we want to say query dot game ID, right? And if everything works well, that selector should return a result, and that result should have some documents in it. So we can save that. And if we run the curl command now, we get data. We get an appearance object with a game ID of game one and named Donkey Kong. Pretty cool. And then the character is character one and name Mario. So what we want is just to list the characters. So we can add an option called fields, and fields will allow us to select specific nodes on our document. In this case, we just want to select the character node. And so with that option, we can come down here and rerun our game. And now we just get the character um, and the character node and its value. We could take it further and kind of pluck that character out using a map and just get a list of characters like that. And that's pretty easy to do. So we can just say map and then um, the document we get, and we just want to return doc.character, right? And now we'll get our character. We can also test with game two, and we get two characters. We get Mario and Luigi. Um, Super cool. So with this query, we were able to say, give us document type appearance, and we were able to use the dot identifier to drill deep into the document. So there's a game property, and inside the game property is an ID property. And that ID property we want to match to query game ID. So with the query selector, it works a lot like MongoDB or Mango in Couch. Selector format. And you can see all the selectors that you can do in our hyper data documentation. And there's a link in the README here to read our docs. But when we specify type and then the character value, we're basically saying that it's equal. So we want to say type is equal to character, and that'll give us all the character documents. Um, so we've got our kind of query, and we also have this index command. So I'm going to refactor that where we're doing this list all the documents and filter by type. I'm just going to refactor that to use query and say, give us the documents that are type character. So query type character like that. And then I don't need this filter here. I can just um, set characters equals to docs and then send characters. And that should work just as good. And we'll, each time we make a call to the database, we're not having to pull back all the documents. So now we're just pulling back just the character documents. And we can test that by saying local host 3000 API characters, and that should list all the characters, which is cool. You can pipe that into npx JSON to kind of list them out. But you can see each document is a character type. Cool. Now, that is query. And query is super powerful. You can use fields like we did, or limit to limit the amount. You can also sort the objects based on properties. And you can specify an index. So there's a create index command in Hyper where you can create an index and say index these properties on an object, and then you can specify to use that index to optimize the query so you get pretty fast read times on that. Um, so now that we did that with character, something you can do on your own is do the same thing for games. So go into the uh, games folder and create the same um, query function, except traverse the games and the characters. So you would pass character one on the query param, and it would return all the games. So that's an exercise for you guys to do, just to help you reinforce understanding the query function a little bit better. It does take some practice, and but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty much like a where clause on your documents or a filter, and you don't need to go too crazy on it. You just want to basically provide a, a, a grouping of getting the documents back, and then you can use functional functions like map and filter to make your shape look the way that you want to return, as well as to um, kind of include or remove certain um, documents from the initial query. So it's kind of a collaborative effort, and the so that's hyper data query. Hyper data bulk allows you to create, update, or remove characters. So in this case, we're going to do that. We've got some data here. We're going to just copy that data, and we're going to create a new file in our data query folder. And we're just going to call that bulk.js. And in this new file, we're going to just paste that data variable. And what we're going to do is just create this bulk load for our little API, so we can just always load this data. And to do that, we need to import connect from hyper connect. And then we're going to create an instance of hyper by calling connect and getting the environment variable. Okay. And then we're going to call, we'll just log this out, console log, and we'll await hyper.data.bulk, and we're going to pass in our data like that. And that's really it for bulk. There's not a lot to it. So we can run that, and we can run that down here on the terminal. We'll cd into data.query, and we'll just type node, and we're going to just require our .env config file, and then type bulk.js, hit enter. If everything works, we get the response back, okay, true, and the results. So we updated character 10, 11, 12, game 10, 11, and appearance 11. So if we wanted to remove any of these documents, we can just add on the document deleted true, and then this bulk will actually remove that document from the database. So we do that, and now the appearance 10 document is gone. And that's pretty much it. That's bulk and query. Um, you know, definitely give all of these a try. They're very easy to use. And one of the nice things you can do with query and bulk is do composition. So here's an example of, let's say you delete a character from your wiki, and you want to remove all the appearances where that character is, all the relationships. Then you can use bulk to query all those appearances, and then bulk to remove them. Same thing with the game. When a game is deleted, here's an example where we find all the appearances of that game, and then we mark all those docs deleted to true, and then we throw those in the bulk so it removes all the appearances. Then we remove game one, and that's a very nice way to do a cascading delete in a single table database design structure. So hopefully you enjoyed this workshop. If you have any questions, reach out, and we will be working on the cache workshop and the new search workshop coming soon. Thanks.